Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leffridge, and I would like to welcome you to the Shade Chronicles.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and I also want to welcome you and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story. Resetting the Doomsday Clock by Lawrence Trokey. He sat in the lower bunk of the stateroom. The Navy pilots that shared the room with him were in other parts of the aircraft, either in the mess or in the ready room or on deck. The tablet in his hand showed him an image of the most precious things to him on the planet, his wife and 2 young children. The video quality was good for the most part, with the occasional burst of static or digital interference. "Are you still there, Nick?" His wife picked up the younger of the 2 children, Thomas, an energetic 3-year-old who was more interested in playing with his toys than talking to Daddy on the video call. "Yes, I'm still here. Hey, buddy, it's Daddy. Can you say hi?" Thomas wiggled and strained in his mother's hands, only wanting to get back to his toys. A string of no's, escalating in severity to the verge of tears, was Thomas's reaction at first, till his mother acquiesced and gently put him down by his pile of toy trucks. His mood improved dramatically as he played with his trucks. "I'm sorry, he's just not..." Megan, Nick's wife, apologized for Thomas's behavior. "It's okay, let him play." Nick smiled briefly at the enthusiasm his son displayed for his toys. "Hi, Daddy." His 4-year-old daughter, April, sprang into view. "Are you on the boat?" "Hi, Princess. Yes, I'm on the boat. Are you going to go fishing?" she asked while combing the hair of her doll. "Maybe, honey, we'll see." He smiled at her question. His spirits were lifted for a moment, and then fell as the reality of the situation set in. "Okay." She, too, was now distracted by her doll and sat down near her brother. His wife brought the tablet closer to her, so she was the only one in frame now. She was so beautiful. How did he ever get her to say yes, he wondered. "We've got everything packed. We'll be leaving in a few minutes for Dad's place. The last time I checked traffic, it didn't look too bad, so we should be able to get there in about an hour." She looked at her watch to check to make sure she was on schedule. "Good," he said, although he knew it didn't matter where they went. Still, it was good she'd be with her mom and dad in the end. "Be careful. Are you carrying the Glock? It's loaded, right? It's not packed away in one of the bags?" "Yes, I have it on a concealed hip holster. There's extra clips in the center console of the Jeep." Good. Now he came to the time he was dreading. He had to say goodbye. His gut was in knots, and his hands started to shake some. Emotions began rising up in him, and he fought with all of his strength to keep them in check. "Megan, it's time now, honey. You should go." "We've got a couple minutes still. Just 2 more minutes." She was pleading to stay on the call. "Baby, I love you more than life. Make sure Tommy and April know I feel the same about them." "Nick, please, just a minute more. I love you too." Tears began streaming down her face, and she wiped them away. "I can't imagine being without you." "I know. I feel the same." He was cut off by an alarm that sounded through the ship. Simultaneously, the emergency broadcast system appeared on the television in the background of Nick's home. Megan turned to face the screen, realized what it meant, and fear shot across her face. "You've got to go. Get to your dad's now. I love you," Nick shouted at the screen. Megan couldn't speak for a second because emotions choked her voice. But as she tried to respond in kind to Nick's statement, the connection was lost. He sat there for a few moments, realizing his whole world had just blinked out of existence. The alarm forced him to focus on his job and not let his emotions overtake him. He laid the tablet on the bunk and grabbed his flight gear. He rushed through the narrow hallways of the carrier, making his way to the flight deck. "General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. The route of travel is forward and up to the starboard, down and aft to port. Set material condition zebra throughout the ship." The announcement continued over the ship's intercom. Once on the flight deck, he got the signal from his ground crew that his fighter was ready. By the time he was seated in the cockpit, the entire ship was at battle stations. Things were happening fast, and he needed to get his fighter off the deck and in the air to protect the carrier. He made it through his pre-flight checklist just as he was signaled by the ground crew to taxi for takeoff. Then the F-35C fighter shot down the short runway with the aid of the carrier's catapult, climbing to join the rest of his squad. He checked in with the flight leader over the comms as he approached and took his place in formation. They were flying in a diamond formation with the flight leader at the tip and Nick taking the place off his right wing. A second later, a message came over the comms. Stand by for a message from the President of the United States. This was highly unusual, but so was the situation they were all facing at the moment. The President of the United States, announced the nameless person speaking in Nick's headset. As you are aware, the Russian Federation, under the control of the rebel warlord Morozov, has launched a massive nuclear strike on the United States and its territories. The U.S. has responded in kind and has launched its nuclear arsenal against Russian Federation targets. I speak now to the entirety of our armed forces, both at home and abroad. I know this is the worst possible scenario for us all, but we are survivors. You will need to dig deep to find a way to survive and protect your homeland from further Russian aggression, or anyone else that would think we are no longer able to defend ourselves. I realize the casualties will be unheard of, and your suffering will be great, but make no mistake, the United States government will survive this nightmare, and we will rebuild. Command and control functions will still operate from the government's central location. If your base is destroyed, look to join other members of the military and form new units. If you are at sea, look for safe harbors where you can take shelter. Then, when you are able, steam back to the United States to help with the protection and rebuilding of this great nation. Do not give in to fear and lawlessness, but maintain discipline in the ranks and preserve the great legacy of this nation with your service and your lives. God bless you all, and God bless the United States. The sun will rise on us again. The transmission ended. Nick was not moved by its message of patriotism and service. All he could think of was that his family, as well as all of humanity for that matter, was being consumed in a fiery ball because of the power struggle between two greedy and selfish governments. Anger and sadness threatened to overtake him again, so he focused on the little tasks he needed to do to keep his fighter in flight. Suddenly to the left near the horizon, a flash with the brilliance of the sun expanded rapidly. Nick threw down his visor over his eyes to shield it. The nuke was several miles away, but he knew the flash could still damage his retinas. Another flash even further away over the horizon signaled the beginning of the end. Nick's carrier strike group was positioned 50 miles southwest of Guam. The flashes he saw were the first in a wave of nuclear weapons being deployed. This round consisted of EMP, or electromagnetic pulse weapons, designed to fry the energy grid and electronics of military and civilian targets in the area. Guam, being the home to an Air Force base, Navy, and National Guard bases, was a prime target to take out to limit the U.S.'s abilities in the Micronesia region. Nick saw an encrypted message from the command center of the carrier. He switched on his data link terminal to receive the message. All ships in the strike group Delta be advised. Radar shows an incoming ICBM targeting our position. ETA 6 minutes. Command is ordering all surface ships to harden for incoming missile attack and make best speed to heading 074. Subclass vessels dive to protective depth and maintain course 074. Airships make best speed to Naval Advanced Base Saipan. Maintain radio silence. Good luck and Godspeed. Nick saw the flight commander give the hand signal for hit the deck, which meant they would reduce altitude dramatically and skim over the ocean surface to avoid any detection by radar from other threats in the region. As they pulled away rapidly from the carrier group behind them, Nick tried not to think about the fate of his friends on the carrier, who would most likely be destroyed by the incoming missile. At about 100 feet over the surface of the water, the jets fired their afterburners to reach top speed. They would burn through fuel quickly doing this, but their destination was well within their range. Hopefully, they could refuel in the air with the support of the base at Saipan. Suddenly, Nick's heads-up display flashed a collision alert, fast approaching. He scanned the data, but what he saw didn't make any sense. Something dead ahead was filling the horizon, like a mountain range, but according to their position, they were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, near the northern Mariana Islands. There shouldn't be anything near them for several minutes, yet the collision alert warning was sounding and the object filling the horizon was growing at an alarming rate. Nick saw the flight leader give the order to slow and climb. This meant they would be giving away the protection of flying below radar detection, but they had no choice. They either needed to climb or run into whatever the hell it was in front of them. It started to take shape after a moment. With more altitude, the dome-like shape was clear. They were getting close now, and the flight leader signaled a direction change that led them to move parallel along its border. His intention was to fly around the object and possibly recon the area. However, the farther they flew, they saw no end of the shape. It apparently was rising out of the ocean and went on for miles. The middle of the dome was now reaching into the troposphere by a few miles. It took Nick a moment to realize the scale of this thing, but when he did, all he could do was stare at it. It seemed like several minutes passed before the voice of the squadron leader came over Nick's headset, bringing him out of the trance. "All flights, this is Squadron Commander. Maintain heading 186. Let's give this thing a wide berth." Nick adjusted his course as instructed, but he couldn't take his eyes off of it. As far as he could tell from this distance, the dome had no features. Its surface was smooth. It was the color of a storm cloud, bluish gray, but not consistent like something that was manufactured. It seemed organic, but not made out of rock and sand like an island. Its sheer size was jaw-dropping because there didn't seem to be any end to the thing. It went on in both directions across their original flight path as far as he could see. The radar signature backed that up as well. It was like something the size of a continent floated to the surface of the ocean in the middle of the Pacific. Without warning, Nick started to feel weird. His vision blurred, and his head felt light. He tried to shake off the feeling and focus on flying the jet. The feeling became more intense, and then a voice in his head said, "Familiar." He didn't know why he heard this in his head or what it meant. Before he could do anything else, Nick blacked out. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier, the strike group commander and captain waited for the end together. Rear Admiral Thomas smoked a cigar, an obvious violation of not being in a designated area, but no one cared. They all knew this was it. The captain just sent a text to his wife back in Virginia, but he wasn't certain if it would get to her or even where she was at the moment. The officer of the watch, Lieutenant Rodriguez, was quietly reciting the rosary, while his right hand held the string of beads he kept in his pocket. As expected, the mood was somber and quiet, with only the rumble of big machines and the ocean filling the void. 2 minutes to missile impact, reported the Combat Direction Center over the intercom on the bridge. "Prepare countermeasures," the captain ordered, knowing there was little point in it. Even if they were lucky enough to acquire the missile with their targeting radar, the missile would most likely detonate before the countermeasures could deploy. Even though it was miles away, the blast radius would consume the carrier strike group in a flash. It was like that with horseshoes, hand grenades, and modern nuclear weapons. "It's been a privilege, Tom." The Rear Admiral reached out to shake the captain's hand. "Likewise, sir." The captain took the Admiral's hand in his. Another announcement rang out from the CDC over the intercom. "Target has disappeared, Captain. We're no longer tracking it." "What the hell?" The captain spat out, and then his vision blurred. He felt lightheaded and had to reach out to stabilize himself on a nearby console. He heard a voice in his head say, "It is not permitted." Then the feeling passed, and he looked around the bridge. The Rear Admiral and the other crew members were also steadying themselves from the same experience. "What the hell was that? Did you hear that?" the Admiral asked. No one on the bridge had an answer for the Admiral. The captain went to the intercom. "Was there an explosion detected?" "No, sir. Nothing that would indicate the missile exploded. It just disappeared off our screens," the CDC officer reported back. The communications officer interrupted. "Secure message coming in from Com 7th Fleet." The message was coming from the commander of the 7th Fleet, Vice Admiral Black. The captain and the Rear Admiral moved to the communications station to receive the message. It read, "Missile strikes disabled on both sides across the world. No explanation. Satellites tracking massive object near Mariana Islands. Size is off the charts. Nearly the size of Texas. All armed forces are on standby. Your orders are to approach the object and report back." The captain and the Admiral looked at each other in disbelief. It took them several moments before either of them started issuing orders to comply with the message. Nick awoke lying on the floor of a room, or what he thought was a room at first. The floor itself was smooth as glass and was cool to the touch. He sat up and scanned the area, but he couldn't tell how big the room was. He didn't see any walls, only darkness and shadow where the light faded. Overhead, he didn't see any ceiling or roof. There was only a single light source above him, illuminating the area. Beyond that, more darkness. He looked behind him and was surprised to see his F-35C fighter parked like it was sitting on the flight deck of the carrier. Beyond that, darkness. He was still in his flight gear, helmet included. He took it off and laid it on the floor next to him. Then he stood up and thought about what to do next. Maybe he could climb back into the cockpit of his fighter and try to radio the squadron leader. After a moment, he figured it was pointless to try. Wherever he was and the manner in which he got there was not normal. None of this was, so he decided to wait for the next move by whoever it was that was responsible for the giant dome and his arrival in this place. He wasn't afraid, even though he thought he had every right to be. Some of it was due to his training, remaining calm in stressful situations. But the real reason he wasn't afraid was there was something familiar. That word came to him again, and he remembered the events that brought him here. He had heard the voice, but it was not an audible sound. It was in his head. What did it mean? Why would any of this be familiar to him? He saw a light in the darkness ahead of him then. It was soft, but still very distinct, and it was moving closer. After a moment, it took the shape of a column of light. Still not very bright, but it had definitely defined edges. It began at the floor, but the top just faded into the dark above. It was now only a few feet away from where he stood. Maybe now he was a little afraid. It had stopped moving, and Nick took a moment to look it over. He thought it might be made of glass or something transparent because of the way the light inside seemed to be bound by its edges. Sucking up his courage, Nick stepped towards it until he was able to reach out and touch it. It felt just like the floor, smooth and cool to the touch. It reminded him of the walls of an aquarium his family had seen in Orlando at some amusement park last year. Nick noticed a dark shape appear in the column of light. It started to grow bigger, like it was an object moving closer to him. He instinctively stepped back, unsure if he had done something to trigger this. As the shape grew bigger, more details came into focus. It had the shape of a dolphin that was standing upright on its tail, only this dolphin did not have large flukes at the end of its body, which would normally be used for swimming and navigation. It just tapered into a blunt end. Instead of pectoral fins on either side, it had tendrils that were more like arms, which ended in flat, disc-shaped appendages. Its head was dolphin-like in size and shape, but the eyes were closer together, more like a human, and its beak was much shorter than that of a dolphin. Its coloring was bluish-gray, like that of the ocean mammal too. Nick stood in silence as he watched the being float behind the glass of the column. It appeared to be suspended in water. It approached Nick till it was just on the other side of the transparent barrier. The warm glow inside illuminated it from all sides. Familiar, Nick heard again. Then, Nick. It knew his name. "Yes, I'm Nick," he said out loud. The sound in the space had a strange quality. It did not echo or reverberate. It just hung in the air for a moment and then went away. "Remember." Nick heard this, and the hue of the light overhead changed slightly. Images began to appear in Nick's mind of him flying a patrol in his fighter jet. He remembered a specific flight that was just a routine mission, nothing of any importance, when it happened, when he encountered them for the first time. Nick and his wingmen were flying a few miles north of the carrier group, patrolling an area not far from the Mariana Islands, when they witnessed a UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. This was the new acronym to identify what was referred to previously as UFO. The change in label was due to the fact that the term UFO carried a lot of baggage and was associated with very extreme and fanciful ideas. The hope was the term UAP could be used in a more scientific way to describe objects which defied explanation. The UAP appeared first on their radar at the edge of its range. Before they could react, it closed most of the distance between them, which meant it was traveling at an ungodly speed. Nothing in modern aviation moved that fast, Nick knew. Then he saw it. It was like a round ball, with no features that would indicate wings, engine, propeller, or anything else needed to keep an object in flight. It matched their speed and kept pace with them for several miles, never coming any closer, just shadowing them. The next memory took Nick by surprise because he didn't have any recollection of it. He remembered having the same blurring of vision and dizziness as he had in the fighter before, but in the memory, Nick didn't appear in some strange place. Instead, he felt as if he was being communicated with by the same being that stood before him now. Only there were no words exchanged. The being was probing Nick's mind through some extrasensory ability, learning about him. It was not painful or even intrusive, Nick remembered. He felt calm and at peace with the being. Maybe that was intentionally done by the being to keep Nick from fighting him. Either way, Nick did not feel threatened by the experience. And then the connection was gone. Nick came out of what he felt like it was a trance and glanced over to the location of the UAP, and it was gone too. Nick's wingman was calling him on the comm, asking him what they should do, but it took him a moment to respond. When he did, he told the wingman they needed to head back to the carrier. At first, the wingman wanted to report to the carrier for instructions, but Nick stopped him. The idea of him becoming labeled as one of those pilots who had seen a UFO worried him. He explained there might be career-altering blowback for both of them if they reported they saw a UAP. People might not take them seriously anymore or even question their competence. The wingman agreed, so neither one of them mentioned it in their post-flight report. The memories faded from Nick's mind, and he was back standing next to the column and the being. Somehow he had forgotten about the mental probing during the patrol. The incident had just vanished, edited out of his memories. He wondered why, but assumed the being didn't want to frighten him, so it erased the moment from Nick's mind. "I speak to you now like you speak." Nick heard the being's thoughts in his head. "Okay," was all Nick could think to say in response. "The conflict is not permitted. It would destroy the surface, which destroys us." The being's tone was not threatening. It was merely conveying the facts of the situation. "We are not of the surface. We are of the ocean, or sea as you name it. We do not live on the surface, but we need the surface to live so we can live also." Nick nodded. The thought of another race far more advanced than mankind living in the ocean seemed incredible to him. "We have long lived in the ocean. We started in the ocean. You too started in the ocean, but then left it for the surface. We did not. We stay in the ocean, but you do not stay on the surface. What you do on the surface hurts the surface, and the ocean, and the sky. We did not interfere before, but you have gone too far. It is not permitted." The being floated in the tank of illuminated water for several seconds, letting its words penetrate Nick's consciousness. Nick had no response to the statement. He understood too well what mankind had done to the planet up to this point, with its final act being the attempted destruction of itself until the being stepped in to prevent it from happening. "Your life has not been part of our life. We do not want your life. We only want our life. Your life has become part of our life now. It is not permitted. You will tell the surface it is not permitted. You will tell the surface we do not want your life. You must tell them there is no other way permitted. The ocean is ours. The surface is yours. Do not harm the ocean again. It is not permitted. You have seen us, and we have been watching you. You did not understand before. You understand now. Tell the surface so it understands. We are watching you." Nick just stood there listening to the being, taking it all in. After a moment, questions started to occur to him, but it appeared he ran out of time. The being retreated in the column, and the column went dark. It too retreated back into the shadows of the space. A new light emerged over his head. He looked up and saw it grow. He realized after a moment that he was looking at the sky. Then he felt the floor he stood on starting to rise, like an elevator platform on a carrier. He understood this to mean that he was being shown the door. He picked up his helmet and went to the side of his fighter. The ladder extension to the cockpit was out, and he quickly scrambled up it to board the jet. As he retracted the ladder and was closing the cockpit, he saw he had been elevated to the surface of the dome structure and could see the sky and ocean around him. He wasn't sure what to do next exactly. He had never taken off a structure like this. Before he could decide, the engine fired up and his plane began taxiing down a runway-like area that formed on the surface of the dome. He grabbed the controls just as his fighter raced down the runway and took to the air. Once in the air, he was in complete control of his jet. As he gained altitude, he saw his squadron on the radar and the carrier group in the distance. He wasn't sure what to tell them. He couldn't really explain it himself. He just knew that he was given a second chance to see his family again and live in a world that no longer was under the threat of destroying itself. Maybe an asteroid or a gamma-ray burst would finally be man's fate, but any man-made calamity was now off the table. He knew that for certain because they would be watching, and anything else was not permitted.